Louise Steinman, the program director for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, which makes all of these free ALOUD programs possible. So it's a delight to see you here. If you are already a library associate and supporting this program, I want to thank you. We also have a donation jar in the lobby, and it really does help, so we thank you. And meeting my Russian cousins brought home to me how easily, had my grandparents and my father not left Ukraine in 1921, how my own story could have resembled theirs. And it probably would have closely resembled Emil Draitser's as well. Emil Draitser's beautiful and compelling memoir, Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, takes the reader back to his childhood and provides a unique account of mid-20th century life in Russia as the young Draitser struggles to reconcile the harsh values of Soviet society with the values of his working-class Jewish family. It's lively, evocative, and rich with humor, and it ends this unforgettable story with the death of Stalin. And through the life stories of his ancestors, Emil Draitser presents a sweeping panorama of 2 centuries of Jewish history in Russia. Emil Draitser has been publishing both fiction and nonfiction since 1965. Under a pen name, his work appeared in leading Russian journals. In 1974, blacklisted by the Soviet literary establishment for a satirical attack on one of its members, he immigrated to the United States, where he continued his writing career. After settling in his new country, he earned an MA and then a PhD in Russian literature from UCLA. His first book published in the United States was Forbidden Laughter, Soviet Underground Humor, which garnered national attention. He has won many prizes for his work, and his essays and short stories have been published in many places, including the Los Angeles Times, the North American Review, and American and Canadian periodicals. He is a professor of Russian at Hunter College of the City University of New York, and his book, Stalin's Romeo Spy, The Remarkable Rise and Fall of the KGB's Most Daring Operative, comes out just later this spring from Northwestern University Press. In conversation with Professor Draitser tonight, we're very lucky to have Suzy Weissman, who is professor and chair of politics at St. Mary's College of California. She sits on the editorial boards of Critique and Against the Current. She's the author of Victor Serge, The Course is Set on Hope, and edited Victor Serge, Russia 20 Years After, and the Ideas of Victor Serge, as well as many articles on the Soviet Union and Russia. She's the host of several drive-time public affairs programs on KPFK and has produced many special programs and live broadcasts during the years of turmoil and disintegration in the Soviet Union. Her radio programs from 1986 to 2001 are a featured archive at the Hoover Institution for War and Peace at Stanford University. It gives me great pleasure, and I hope you will join me in welcoming Emil Draitser and Suzy Weissman to the Los Angeles Public Library. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can you hear me? You can hear? Great. Well, very nice to see all of you, and I'm really glad we didn't have the rain tonight that was predicted, and that you came out here. Louise did a really nice job of setting this up. Emil has written a beautiful, evocative book that I hope you guys will all go out and buy afterwards. He's going to be signing it after this ends. And it's lyrical, it's full of humor, it's extremely well written. It recalls a world that some of you may have heard about from your grandparents and maybe parents, or if you've visited, but it is definitely a different world, and it's especially a different world for American Jews when you think about, you know, the way that our own experience here. And but I wanted to kind of just set it up really just a little bit about what was going on during Emil's childhood in the Soviet Union, because so many of us think of, or progressives and liberals and others think of the Soviet Union as the bulwark against fascism. They fought, you know, Hitler on the ground, and they're the ones, if you have been educated in Europe, you learn that it was the Red Army that defeated Hitler in the Second World War. And yet at the same time, we have this other side where we learn that anti-Semitism was rife. And part of that mythology is that Jews were safer in the Soviet Union during the Stalin period because they didn't get sent to the death camps, and in fact they were evacuated to the Russian Far East and even to Birobidzhan, which was the Jewish Republic. So So one of the questions that I'm going to be asking Emil to discuss a little bit later is the role that anti-Semitism played in the former Soviet Union. And just, you know, to kind of set that up too, because when you have a society that proclaims that it is the workers' paradise, that it is the society where man is in charge of his own destiny, and yet the official ideology is contradicted every day in every way by daily practice, then you have these sub-ideologies at work. And one of them was anti-Semitism, another later anti-Armenian sentiment and anti-Chinese sentiment. So, but Emil's book really brings it all home. So, having said all of that, I wanted to ask you first, because earlier, many years ago, you and I, on my radio show, talked about your other work as a scholar of ethnic humor and Jewish humor, and you wrote the wonderful book about laughter and jokes, but also Make War Not Love in the Soviet Union. So I guess really to start with, what is it that made you switch from, you know, these scholarly work on humor and some of the jokes to writing this kind of a memoir?
Actually, it wasn't sort of absolutely unexpected because, I wrote journalistic pieces in Russia. I wrote short stories published here in this country. Scholarly work, this was natural since I was actually. When I think back, I didn't have much of a choice. Everything sort of that happened that told me that I'm a serious man, basically. But when I came with a serious piece of writing to a newspaper in Moscow, they read it and say, yeah, it's well written, so on. Where are you from? I say from Odessa. Oh, не морочьте голову. Please write me a feuilleton, write a satirical column. It is assumed, since you were born in Odessa, you have sense of humor, and that's it. Your destiny is there. I mean, there's no question about it. And that's how it happened. I did start writing it. To my astonishment, I found that I have some sense of humor. Anyway. And, but when I came to this country, it was only natural that when I was a graduate student at UCLA, that when it came time to write dissertation, I was obviously interested to always ask myself, I wish I knew how to make the piece of writing funny if I knew some tricks, how this is done. So, therefore, my dissertation was actually a dissection of techniques of the comic writing. I took the most famous Russian satirist of 19th century after Gogol, Saldakov-Shchedrin, and my book was actually the art of the comic in Saldakov-Shchedrin. And I found that actually that the book, then my dissertation was published as a book in English because he adopted all the discoveries in that genre from West European satirists, from Cervantes and from Dickens and so on. So therefore, the book was published. The name of it is Techniques of Satire, the Case of Saldakov-Shchedrin. So that was sort of natural kind of outgrowth. Then again, with humor, there was always, especially, I left Russia in 1974. For as long as I remember myself in Russia, at least for the last 10, 15 years of my adult life, the abundance of jokes on everyday life was just tremendous. And I always ask myself a question, is it just entertainment or something else there? So basically, down the road, I wrote two books. One is Making War Not Love, Gender and Sexuality in Russian Humor. What I actually did, I took I think 500 or 600 jokes, and I dissected how they represent the culture, how they represent attitude toward women, how they represent attitude toward sexuality, what they say about people who tell this joke. Because Sigmund Freud said, tell me your favorite joke and I'll tell you what's your problem. That was the key. Then, after I finished it, the second book was about ethnic humor, because that was, again, a tremendous amount of ethnic jokes about Georgians, about Ukrainians, and needless to say, Jewish jokes that Jews told it. And actually, what I kind of stumbled upon when I thought of it, that there was something that Jewish jokes in Russia played a social function that they had to play because of the absence of a normal Jewish community. As some of you may know, there was nothing like that, nothing at all. So what these jokes, especially at the time of immigration, they sort of helped to make a decision, pushed, tried to clarify. I'll just give you one example of it. For example, if you, and it was difficult. Anyone who went through immigration, you know, this is not so easy. It's not like you pack up your suitcase, you go. Your whole life actually almost like ends. You have to start everything anew. Especially, you're not moving from France to America, you're moving from Soviet Union under Brezhnev to a completely different world in which you're scared because of the propaganda. You don't believe propaganda, but what else you believe? You don't know. You have no information. So anyway, so these ethnic Jewish jokes of the time were kind of almost like putting in one's mouth. Why are you immigrating? So one of this setup is that a Jew comes.
Tell us a joke, and also just to say so because you mentioned Odessa, which is really, you know, almost mythical in let's say North American Jewish folklore, because so many of our relatives come from that area. So we have a picture of it, which you paint like an artist in your book that gives some childhood. So why don't you first just give us a little sense of that humor? Maybe tell a joke.
Well, but that okay. In the Soviet Union, Odessa was a kind of a euphemism for Jewish. Even there were movies produced by the Soviets, and it was impossible for political reasons to say, oh, he's a Jew. You say, hey, he's from Odessa. And that was enough, okay? And I write about it in one of the chapters, remember, about that situation. But back to the joke, for example, with this hesitation, what to do and how to, a Jew is summoned to the KGB, and the KGB officer said, why did you want to leave the best country in the world? What is it with you? Look, I have only two reasons. So what's the reason? The first reason is that my neighbor, when he gets drunk, he starts banging the door. Wait until we finish off with the Soviet power, then we'll get to you Jews. Then the KGB says, what are you listening? This kind of a backward guy, don't believe Soviet power will be forever and ever and ever. And he said, that's my second reason.
Well done. Okay, but just outside in the green room, you said something that kind of shocked me, Emil. You said that when you came to this country, you lost your sense of humor, and I've known you long enough to just find that unbelievable. But so that. Did
you immigrate?
Well, that's a different story, but no. I want to ask you, though, because you paint this story, even though we've just set it up as Odessa is a Jewish city, it's a synonym for Jewish, and yet your childhood is just painful to read about because it is so filled with anti-Semitism. And so I guess this is a way of asking why you have the title Shush. I know that you said that in casual conversation with a colleague, he pointed out to you.
Actually, that's what I started. It actually happened, I set it up because I did not know that I'm going to write a memoir, because coming from Russia, memoirs are written by ballerinas of Bolshoi theater or a general. I was neither or, okay? So what kind of memoir are you talking about? However, after I gave a talk on the social functions of Jewish humor at the University of Albany, and I was, like host invited me to dinner. So during the dinner, the chairman of the department, she is a Polish Jew, she told me what she remembers from the time that she left Poland. She was age 8. She remembers as a child something about Jewish life there and so on. And I, just to keep conversation going, said, yeah, I remember also something and so on. And all of a sudden she told me, did you notice the moment you pronounce the word Jewish, you lower your voice? And I was absolutely startled. By that time, mind you, I was 15 years in America. Anything happened to me that would be justifying it. Nothing at all. And that gave me really a pause. A few months later, I was interviewed, like many other immigrants from Russia, from the Soviet Union, by the program Oral History of East European Jews. So I believe it was a government program. A graduate student interviewed me, and she kept asking me something about my early childhood experience and so on. And all of a sudden, while telling her, I felt a lump in my throat. I felt, what is this? I felt kind of ashamed. Here you are, a grown man, it's almost like crying or what? And she told me, you know what, don't worry about it. Most people I talk to have the same reaction. So what I realized is nothing about me. It's my generation of Jewish children who grew up in the period that I grew up, right after the end of World War II to the Stalin's death, the darkest period of life in the Soviet Union. So that kind of gave me I felt that I'm almost like I have to write it. I'm in good position. My English improved dramatically from, you said, why 6 months I have no sense of humor. I didn't have enough English. That's about it. Needless to say, of course, first 6 months is a difficult time for anyone.
Well, maybe we can go into just a few of those stories, because Emil is just giving you a little bit of a flavor of that, but if you read the book, you'll see that he doesn't even want anyone to know his real name, Emil.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. I just wanted to add something else. But since I'm a writer, there should be somebody, I believe Norman Mailer noticed that that writers like almost like marathon, like runners, whatever, they look what else they can do, whatever. You know, there is some sense of competition. At that time, when I'm telling you, a wonderful, brilliant book was published, a memoir, Angelus Ashes. I'm sure, no. Brilliant, wonderful book, a memoir. But what really irked me that on the opening page, Frank McCourt writes, many people, write about the poor, miserable life of the childhood of the people. But what could be worse than being an Irish child in that time at all? And I say, oh yeah? And being a Jewish child in Odessa right after war under Stalin? That really made me going. I felt, no, I have to tell my story.
So perfect. So tell a little bit, because the reaction of your schoolmates and the teachers and the townspeople when you came back, was pretty negative, and you internalized all these negative feelings. Tell the audience where you went, and maybe a little bit about how you saved your mom, this wonderful Yiddish mama that we will all recognize at some point.
Well, that's sort of, I was not ready for what happened. I think it has to be explained, but people, there is so much mythology about Stalin's time still exists in America that people would wonder why all this together, what happened. But really, one of the probably central episodes of that time is the accusation of my peers, of my classmates, that I hid out during the war in Tashkent. Tashkent is a proverbial place where Jews were saved. First of all, let's go to statistics. How many Jews perished during German invasion? This alone will tell you what a lie it was, produced by Stalin's emissaries who came to the United States for one purpose: raise money for Russian war effort. You probably know there was an anti-fascist committee that was organized with Michaels as its head. They came to America, they were in New York, they were in Los Angeles, they brought up. With them came the myth that Stalin took special care of Soviet Jews, saving them to the terror. Obviously, no information existed at that time. What this Holocaust is all about, when you now talk about Holocaust, half of the people who perished were already shot on Russian territory before the final solution, this committee signed the paper. Do you understand? Before that, starting June 22nd, the moment German troops went into Russian territory, Holocaust started. I described the fate of my grandfathers, one in Minsk and one in Odessa, how this was done. So obviously this has nothing to do. But at the same time, these kids, and it took me a while to understand where this comes from, that they hid in Tashkent. You may be surprised. Nazi propaganda. They threw leaflets in order to undermine the spirit of fighting on the Soviet army. They threw leaflets saying, come on, who you try to defend? Jews, they're all saved in Tashkent, and you're fighting for nothing. Come on, and so on. And it worked. Odessa was 2.5 years under German and Romanian occupation. Anti-Semitic campaign was absolutely horrendous. In Russian, of course, language, there was professors of local university who stayed there, read lectures and so on. And children, what do you want from children? They simply soaked in what they heard. They had no protection against it, and obviously they heard what was spoken at home and so on. That was the atmosphere. That was sort of almost like burned territory, spiritually speaking. That's the territory we all wind up when we came back. And never mind that practically all men in my family fought during World War II. My father was in the army. My uncle was in the army. My other uncle was killed during Kursk. This famous, I describe it, the only poet in our family. So, nevertheless, when you are alone and you're attacked from all sides, it is hard. So the only thing you do is you try to survive by, what I understood is sort of a personal version of Stockholm Syndrome. In other words, if you know what it means, in order to survive somehow internally, you try to see the point that your captors are having and maybe sympathize with them, whatever it is. Of course, I was not anti-Semitic, by all means. My whole family was Jewish all the way through. But I tried to be, I say, hey, what we in school were talking about? Internationalism. Who cares? Who is what nationality and so on.
But even because you describe yourself as a child as a voracious reader, and you read all of the classics and went to all of the plays that you could, because unlike in America, the plays were cheap, you could go. But, and yet, you know, you seem almost devastated when you discover passages in Pushkin that are anti-Semitic, or that...
And Gogol.
Yeah, because I think in a way this story is of your own discovery of the deception about this, the secular paradise that doesn't discriminate. And your parents seem incredibly tolerant, because Emil comes from a working class family. His father was a painter. He painted houses. Your mother... Amazing, but amazing woman. So, you know, so what? Maybe we could talk a little bit about your gradual awakening and your realization that, you know, that first of all, yes, you are Jewish, and that Jews are treated badly, and that it's not to be hated, but something that you have to recognize and embrace.
But most of it was for me kind of, as I'm looking back, trying to realize what is Jewish to begin with, how you know this, who is Jewish or is not. Because my family was not that religious, although major holidays I knew, because my mother would have special food for after Yom Kippur, of course, at the end of it, and Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah and so on and so forth. So as a child, I simply knew there's a new Jewish holiday because of the kind of food.
I want to just interject, because he tells this great story about on Yom Kippur they go to school in your best clothes, and that's how you could tell the other kids were also, the other Jewish kids were also in their best clothes, and that was Yom Kippur.
Now they knew who is Jewish. Yeah, so that was gradually. Then my conversation with my father was also very, very kind of informative, because I had no idea. Even somebody asked me, how you tell a Jewish last name from non-Jewish? I asked father, how do you know? He said, it's very simple. Melnikov is a Russian. Melnik could be a Jew. And I couldn't understand. I thought it sounded funny. But it took me later on, of course, with studies and so on, I realized why. If you're interested, I will explain to you. Ov is the possessive suffix of Russian name. Melnikov means actually the son of Melnik, means in English like millerman, a miller's son, I would say. But if it's Melnik, it means only a nickname. That means it's third generation. He could be Jewish. He could be a Jew in Little Shtetl who does this, and he would be given this name. Secondly, my father would say, I would read names and so on. He says, Uspiansky says, Russian. Warshawski, he could be Jewish. How do I know? Bilocerkovsky, he could be Yidlik, he said in Yiddish. Why? And again, later on I realized what happened. If the last name has the name of a town from which this family came, in order to distinguish two, let's say, Shmuels, right? They say this is Warshawski and this is Minsky. You know, then they know who is who. That's how last names became. You know, obviously, you know, there was no Jewish names till Napoleon time. For taxation, he wanted everybody to have last name so that he can tax. So that's all come about. So in Russia, it's basically kind of the same kind of a tradition came. So that's how gradually I started also seeing, this is Jew and this is not Jew. This football player who is such a wonderful player everybody's proud of, he's Jewish. I'm proud that at least some Jew that I can be proud of, that kind of a thing. So gradually, sort of the division of the world that my father was Jewish, not Jewish, and that was the time, you didn't talk about the campaign against Cosmopolitan.
I want to talk, and maybe, I don't know how many of you know this, that, the buzzword cosmopolitan in Russia certainly means Jews, and just a tiny anecdote, when I went there in '89, I was told by intellectuals at Moscow University that the cosmopolitans were responsible for Chernobyl. These were people with PhDs who were left-wing, who were not otherwise anti-Semitic, yet this kind of language continues. So
it's amazing. It's amazing. But at that time, actually, Stalin started this campaign shortly after the end of World War II, and it was obviously a euphemism for a Jew. And how do we know that this is? First of all, they say, okay, who were these people? And that was interesting in my family, because my family was working class family, and seemingly what it has to do with this kind of sophistication thing, like being cosmopolitan and the rest of it. But the newspapers, we are at newspaper Pravda, you have to know how to read it. And usually when you read it, you understand what is coming, if you know how to read it. So if the article is attacking some literary critic, that he is downgrading, that he doesn't like plays that are produced by Russian theaters, but he tells about great Shakespeare plays and so on, he's a cosmopolitan because he prefers, the world culture over this local culture. And then there will be trick. The name of this article, he would sign probably by one of the names that sounds Russian, like pen name, like Holodov. But these papers of that time, and that's why my family was upset, had in brackets, Holodov in brackets, Silberstein. So that the reader would understand what they're talking about. So we understand it has nothing to do with this goddamn play. Who cares about it, right? It's everything to do to show who is in the brackets. So I felt for the long time as a child, I'm the one from the brackets. From there. I cannot have my own name. It's in the brackets.
Well, okay, so I want to go from there, knowing what's coming, to actually what did come. You describe in the book that even Jews had to hide their grief for their own people who were lost in the Holocaust, and yet, in 1949, when the doctor's plot came out, you describe it. Go ahead.
Yeah, 53. No, well, that's important for people to understand. It's difficult, even now when I talk to my students, I try to explain to them, I have difficulty to explain because it is against anything that we consider common sense. But in Soviet Union at that time, till 1961, not a line in newspapers about the victims of Nazism spoke about Jewish victims of Holocaust. But there was plenty of articles, mind you, about concentration camps, about the death camps, but they would say this were anti-fascists, they were fighters, they were communists, and so on and so forth. Not a word about that. There were most of them. Just last year I visited Auschwitz. It's clear that every plate, 90% of the victims there were Jewish. Yeah, there were other. There were Russian prisoners of war, there were Polish partisans, and so on and so forth. But 90%, we all know that was not a word was in the Soviet papers. So you couldn't. So my grandmother, when she cried, because most of them, in the end of the book I thought of it. Why genealogical tree has to be only for the princes and kingdom? What's wrong with my genealogical tree? So I built it up. And you know what? I saw how many branches were cut by Holocaust. Left and right, left and right, left and right. So that's the sense. It came to my grandmother crying for all this. My aunt and her husband and her 3 children were taken in Minsk ghetto, and they perished. My both grandfathers from my mother's side perished, one in Minsk, another one in Odessa. The whole score of relatives to the right from my mother and father's side perished. But my grandmother could not openly cry because it was considered to be, you should say, there are Soviet victims of the war, not Jewish victims of the war. You know, of course, in Babi Yar, for a long time, they didn't want to put anything, at least when they finally acknowledge that something happened there, they say Soviet citizen. They didn't say that vast majority of them were Jews. That was the atmosphere, that you sort of, you believe as a child when you grow up in the bigger world, you know, can you imagine what does it mean? Newspapers and radio and television then later on came in. I have to tell you something that I discovered recently, that Hitler envied Stalin, admired Stalin for one thing. Stalin did something that Hitler couldn't come up with. Cable radio. What does it mean? In Russian, it's трансляционная точка. What does it mean? Actually, wire comes to your apartment, in every apartment. And mind you, it's only one station. So that's it. So in other words, Hitler thought, how I didn't think of it. To come to every single apartment and have my news, my commentary, mine, and so on and so forth. That's what was done. So that's the world in which I grew up. You believe it. So all sides, they say it, and da. But of course, it grew in me this conflict. I mean, I realized.
And you know, he also congratulated Stalin for cleaning up his party and said he was going to do the same thing, the party, Чистка, the purge. But you just brought up something else that kind of gives the whole atmosphere of the shush, of lowering your voice, of having to hide it. And as a child and as a teenager, you just rejected it. But then slowly you're made to come face to face with it. And I know I don't want to get there yet, but I want to have you describe a little bit what happened at the time of the, toward the end of Stalin's life, not the death, but just when in 1949 he discovers that all the Jewish doctor's plot, which you may or may not know about, but I'll let Emil describe.
No, actually, it's okay. January 12, 1953, there was an article in Pravda that a group of doctors were arrested, Kremlin doctors, most of them the best of medicine of the time, and because they were plotting to kill, actually already accused of killing great Russian writers, generals, admirals, and so on and so forth. And that was probably the scariest time of my time that I remember, because immediately, the episode that I described about my mother's close girlfriend who was a pediatrician.
Oh, it's a wonderful story. And yes, Tanya.
Yeah, Tanya, yeah. That she was in Russian we say, заслуженный педагог. In other words, awarded and much praised pediatrician. And all of a sudden, during the weekday, she came to my mother crying, and my mother asked, why you, what's happening? Are you have a free day today? What happened? Yes, I have free day today and tomorrow and day after tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Why? Because all of a sudden, before, she couldn't handle all the children that they will bring to her, because she was known as a very good doctor. And all of a sudden, nobody would bring their children to her because she was Jewish. That's about it. And the rumors that the Jews actually have a special kind of the inventiveness. They have a special some kind of a shot that makes Russian children get cancer, something like that. Right. Something of that sort. It was a horrific time, and that's what I described at the time like glass. That's how I felt. Nothing moves at that time. It was winter time like glass. Everything seems to be so fragile. Just one knock and everyone will go into pieces.
But what's really interesting, too, is the way that you paint, I guess, the way that your parents just move into action. It's just something they're used to and they know. That Jews keep their bags packed and they know how to act.
Yeah, my mother immediately said, okay, if that's the case, because obviously, immediately, I was a witness of seeing that what my other aunt came and with the news that already car wagons are ready on Odessa station to put all Jews there and take them to Siberia and Kazakhstan and so on and so forth. So that was really something that was a reality at that time, because mind you, that was not the first time. Why people believe? Because, as we all know, over 20 nationalities Stalin moved during the war.
Yeah.
Deported from their place, whether it's Germans who lived on Volga River, whether it was Chechens and Ingushet and so on and so forth. Scores, Crimean Tatars and Greeks and so on. One of my, as a child, I remember describe one of my friends, adult friends, was a Greek man whom I loved. He was my mentor in collecting stamps and so on. And one night he disappeared, and it was clear that my mother, my mother said, don't ask any questions, he's gone and so on. That kind of atmosphere that was real. So my mother immediately threw into action, because her closest girlfriend, and that's something that confirmed in me there is no such a thing, division between Jews and non-Jews, between good people and bad people, because the closest her girlfriend was a Russian woman, Anna Ivanovna. And she said, when this all started, she came to her and said, don't worry, we'll hide you. My mother lives in Tula. We'll hide you in this village, and so be prepared, and so on. My mother went there. So that kind of atmosphere, if you have close friends, that was probably the scariest time of that I remember.
And it's close to the time when you start to come to grips with your Jewishness and embrace it in a way too. And I remember you tell the story, I don't exactly remember where it is, but you're in the hospital and there's a Jewish man, poor man, who keeps trying to talk to you and you don't want to talk to him. You're kind of ashamed of him. That's in an earlier part. And this friend of yours says, why? He's just a Jew, and that's part of it. But okay, so we still have a little bit of time yet, but he's got a great story to tell. And it really has to do with, what it took to be Jewish in terms of the rituals and the cooking, preparation for the holiday. So why don't you talk a little bit about Passover?
Yeah, well, again, it's my mother. She really didn't care. Stalin, not Stalin, but it's Passover. So therefore it has to be fish, carp to be found. And if you know anything about Soviet stores of the time, it was an ordeal to find, almost like a reconnaissance mission, where in the few coming days this fish will appear in the stores. There was a kind of a network of informers, rumors going around, and they finally say, hey, this was in the fish store right in front. And that my mother was early morning there, and you may be amused if you would see from the from the window of third floor where I lived, down there, you would see people line up like in a Congo line, as if they're dancing, holding each other. Why? Not to let anybody cut in, So they will go there like this. And then my mother finally, but fish was only one part. And actually what happened next, and what I'm wanted to read you this part, it's about this tipping point in my life at that time, after which I realized I have no choice. Whether I want it or not, my fate is connected to be with the Jewish people, one way or another. And that came through completely, again, like many other things, unexpected incident that I wanted to read you, to describe. So the year is 1951, Passover time, and Mama says, Mama can't imagine how you could have a Passover without matzah. She's ready to get her hands on it, whatever it will take. One evening, she announces that I'm going to bed early. I will have to get up very early the next morning. Why? I need your help. What kind of a help? Why help? I begin to moan. I'm 14. I don't like to get up early. I'm hopelessly heavy sleeper. You're going to Peresip with me. Peresip, I whine. That's all the way out in the boonies. Boonies or no boonies, it makes no difference. We need to go there to get matzah. Why do we have to go so far away? Ask them that, Mama says, nodding her head in the direction of the window. If they sold matzah in the stores the way they did before the war, we wouldn't have to schlep all the way to the other side of the city. I already know who Mama has in mind. In her speech, the pronoun they has two meanings, depending on the context. They are either Russians or the Soviet power. Often it is hard for me to grasp the difference between them. I keep quiet. It isn't so easy to argue with Mama or to change her mind. Her point of reference is always before the war, which I cannot take issue with. I don't remember what it was like before the war. Then I only had time to be born and to learn how to walk. Everything else in my life began after, when the war had already begun. I sigh. There is nothing I can do. I have to go to bed. Mama wakes me up at 5 in the morning when the first streetcars start to run. Sleepy and bracing myself against the morning chill, I set out with Mama to some bakery all the way in Peresev, to the outskirts of the city to get matzah. We don't go empty-handed, but with 2 net bags full of packs of flour. As it turns out, matzah aren't simply sold. They're exchanged for flour. I don't understand this idiotic arrangement. Flour appears often in the stores. Why don't the people who bake the matzah buy the flour themselves instead of making us drag it across the entire city? Years later, I will learn that Jews are permitted to get matzah baked from their own flour as a community service only, in the Passover season only, and only in that one bakery. I wipe the foggy window with the sleeve of my jacket. In the faint blue of early dawn, my entire city slowly swims past, block by block, from beginning to end. Rabbit-eyed from lack of sleep, workers of morning shift run up the streetcar steps, wearing caps shining from wear. Already we're passing single-story houses. Sometimes we come upon whitewashed village huts, and still we keep going and going. Finally, we get off. Mama walks ahead. In her right hand is a bag with 3 packages of flour. She sticks out her left arm for balance. I drag along behind Mama, holding another package of flour in a net bag. It keeps banging against the backs of my legs. My knees buckle. Mama checks the address against a piece of paper. Finally, we're pushing open a gate. I assumed that getting up so early would be the first to arrive at the bakery. To my disappointment, in the back of the courtyard, a line made up of people exactly like us carrying packs of flour has already assembled. Who is the last in line? Mama asked the usual question. For 40 more minutes, we shift from foot to foot in the courtyard outside a rundown shed. I shiver from the cold. I'm still in foul mood. I didn't get enough sleep, and I feel chilled to the bone. Anyone looking at me would know that I am not at this bakery at my own free will. If it were up to me, I would have slept to my heart's content for at least 3 more hours. Finally, they let us in. Perhaps because I haven't had enough sleep, am chilled to the bone, and have bounced along the streetcar. As soon as I set foot in a tiny, dimly lit bakery, and waves of warm air envelop me, suddenly feel something I didn't expect to encounter here, in the far outskirts of the city, swept by the steppe winds, fragrant with spring moisture. Peace, quiet, and refuge. To my surprise, this tiny, semi-dark bakery, lit by a single wick bulb sticking out from a bare, badly plastered wall, feels like home. It smells of warm flour, of dough, raw and baked. The flame of the oven flutters. I sense the particular domestic comfort that is felt only in a close proximity to a hearth. In a warm white coat, its sides flapping with his every movement, a young, curly-haired baker with lively brown eyes is busy in front of a large oven. He is holding a wide, long-handled wooden paddle. Despite the early hour, he is wide awake, friendly, and even jolly. He tosses the paddle from one hand to another, playing with it as if it were a pool key, opens the oven door, and peers inside. Finally, throwing the oven door wide open, the baker begins to lift up the sheets of ready matzah. In the oven's depth, by the far back wall, crimson-orange flames dance. The baker stores the ready matzah in a carton once used for macaroni. With the same paddle, he snatches up from the tray the rectangles of thinly rolled dough and lines them up evenly, row by row, on the hearthstone. Then he shuts the oven door and nods cordially at Mama and me, wishing us a good holiday. Good Yontif. Good Yontif, Mama answers, brightening up instantly. Good Yontif. She repeats and pulls at my jacket sleeve, motioning for me not to be rude and to respond to the greeting. On the surface, everything that happened after that wasn't at all remarkable. But much later, my mind had returned to that moment again and again. His lively eyes shining, the baker picks up a still warm sheet of matzah from the macaroni box, offers to me, and says warmly and simply, "Good Yontif." At first I'm frightened by the unexpected geniality, the special familial closeness expressed by a total stranger. I couldn't guess then that the young baker, perhaps smiling at his own memories, easily read what was happening in my soul. He understood my stubborn and foolish refusal to accept the inevitable, my belonging to the Jewish people. I was too young to know that I didn't have a chance. The baker must have felt sympathy for the spiritual ignorance of the top student in class 5A, intermediate school number 43 of the city of Odessa, who did not yet know the joy that he is not alone in a cold and lonely world, but with his people. Behind the metal door of oven on its brick floor lay open the pages of the book of their destiny. The blazing tongues of flame at the far wall were the flames of history in which they burned more than once, burned but remained alive. I was not yet capable of understanding that a holiday is the sensation of the warm hand of your people with whom you already share a fate, if not a faith, the need for which you do not yet perceive because of your youth. It was as if the baker offering the piece of matzah said, "You and I are Jews, a single family." Still frowning, I take the matzah from the baker's hand. I do not yet realize the significance of this simple gesture. Now, from the perspective of over 30 years of wandering in alien worlds and lands, I see that in my fingers, the tiny, flame-touched mounds in the matzah rise up like braille. Then I did not yet know that I was blind. I did not yet understand that what I held in my hands was the Bible for the illiterate, the history of the suffering of my people abridged for the uninitiated. I did not understand that by accepting the matzah from the hands of another Jew, I took the first step of my private Passover, my own exodus, my own private flight toward freedom. I did not know that this flight would last the same presaged 40 years needed for the shameful habits of slavery to blow away in roaming through the desert. Nor did I know that to take the Passover vow to eat bland, crunchy, flat bread, to relinquish, if only for a time, thick, yeast-risen loaves, means that I vow to cast away my arrogance, to condemn with that act the sin of pride, of which, however short my life, I was already guilty. Secretly, I considered myself smarter, better educated than my parents, who still obstinately clung to ancient traditions. Good Yontif, says the baker. I do not yet understand that at this moment I have approached my Rubicon. I cannot accept the matzah and say nothing. That will be truly rude. But say in what language? To answer in Yiddish would mean to admit my Jewishness, which I have resisted admitting for a long time. Even though we are meeting for the very first time, the baker addresses me as a family member, a close friend, an insider. How could I respond, "A good holiday to you too" in Russian? Вас тоже с праздником. I do not understand, but intuitively sense the incongruity of such a response to a Jewish greeting spoken in the language of mockery and harassment. If I were to switch over to Russian, by that very action I would reject the closeness and warmth held forth for me. To me, I would push away the person offering me friendship. It would be the same as, no, worse than hiding my hand behind my back or shoving into my pocket if he extended his own hand to shake. I take the matzah from the baker's hand. My fingers are tense. The matzah breaks between them. I have yet to learn that other human values are equally brittle: freedom, trust, friendship, love, life itself. One awkward move can sometimes be enough to destroy them. Good Yontef, overcoming myself, I finally say under my breath. Thank you.
I have about, I don't know, 20 or 30 more questions I want to ask Emil, but we're going to turn it over to you now. So Louise, I think, or others in the, Libby, is, and okay, we have microphones going through the audience. There's so much yet to